Hello, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. Can you hear me, guys, okay? Hear me up there? Hello, balcony crew. It's nice to see you. Hi. My name's Nick Guy. I teach American history here at Cambridge. And it's a huge, huge pleasure, not just to see our distinguished speaker, who I'll introduce in a minute, but also to see all of you here this evening. Now, before I introduce Jim, I want to let a cat out of the bag. We are presenting this event under the auspices of something called the United States Network. Now, those of you who've been here in Cambridge for a little while may wonder what that means. Well, essentially what we're trying to do right now is to figure out ways here in Cambridge to bring together people from across faculties and departments and schools with an interest in the US at a moment where at least some people in the US appear to be, shall we say, turning away from the rest of the world. And our hope is that we may be able to convert this network into a center for United States studies here in Cambridge. That center would have three goals. One would be to bring interesting people to Cambridge from the United States, but also people with an interest in the US from the wider world. A second goal would be to connect people who work on the US, from students to staff, faculty, researchers, to get them talking to each other about the US across departmental lines. So to have political scientists talking to health policy people or historians talking to literary scholars. And the final goal of a center here in Cambridge would be to try to share all of this exciting conversation with the public. So this kind of event is exactly the kind of thing that we would love to see happen at least once every term. So our hope is we may be able to raise the money that will let us create this center and have this kind of event, even at a moment when, as I said a moment ago, the US seems to be, in some ways, turning away from the people who are so interested in it and in some ways dependent on it. So that's the center. Thank you for being here. There are going to be plenty more events, we hope, this year, including an event to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And in a bit, we'll flash up on the screen behind a QR code. So if you sign up for our mailing list, we promise we will only send you emails about our big events. One of the challenges of doing this is like really hard to get email lists for everyone that might be interested in the US. So we're going to try and create our own. Anyway, we'll flash up the code a bit later on. And if you can sign up, that would be awesome. Well, let me introduce our distinguished speaker. James D. Zirin, Jim, is a lawyer, a prolific author, an op-ed writer. He has also been the host of Conversations with Jim Zirin, which is a TV show in which he talks to prominent figures in politics, in the media, in culture. And if you haven't seen the show, if you Google Conversations with Jim Zirin, I think all your episodes are on YouTube, is that right?
All on YouTube.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. And you'll be very impressed. If you do that, you'll realize what a bad interviewer I am. I'd probably be better as the guest than the interviewer, and I wouldn't be a great guest. Anyway, the caliber of guest that Jim gets on is quite something. He has some really amazing people that sit in the chair. Let me tell you a bit about his legal career. He was an assistant US attorney under the legendary New York DA Robert Morgenthau, who many of you may know, particularly famous official in terms of corporate crime in particular. He's also worked in private practice for much of his career. He was on Mayor Michael Bloomberg's commission on police corruption in the early 2000s, and he's a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and of the Council on Foreign Relations. I think it's fair to say that Jim has always had a keen interest in and affection for the United Kingdom, and he spent part of his life attempting to ensure that the links between the UK and the US are as strong as they can be. So that also makes you, I think, a particularly suitable guest as we're trying to kick off our new initiative. It's fair to say, though, that for the past 10 years, a cloud of sorts has passed across Jim's career and horizons, and that cloud is shaped like Donald J. Trump. The unraveling of legal and political norms in what we might now be able to call the age of Trump is something that Jim has given very serious thought to. And I should say, actually, that Jim actually began worrying about the politicization of law even before Trump. His 2016 book, Supremely Partisan, about the kind of political capture of the court, is an important book, I think, to think about in the context of what came next. But then he wrote a sequel to that book in 2019, a sequel of sorts, which is called Plaintiff in Chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. And the reason I think that book is really important is that it gives a sense that litigation, and aggressive litigation, is as essential to Donald Trump as the air he breathes and the food that he eats. And a huge amount of what we can understand about him as a politician is legible through his relationship to the law. And I would say, in the context of this week with the BBC, it's amazing he hasn't already sued the BBC for $1 billion. I mean, if I worked for the BBC, I would be a little worried, but in a sense, everyone Trump meets gets sued. So we're very fortunate to have someone with us today who can help us navigate some of the challenges, some of the difficulties, and also put in perspective the whirlwind of news around Trump's second term. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming to Cambridge, Jim Zirin.
Well, Nick, I'm very much honored to be here and listening to your introduction. I was wondering who you were talking about, but I guess I fill the bill. But please ask me questions. I'd be delighted to answer them.
Well, just to give the people here a sense of kind of where you've come from, is that a fair assessment of your career as one that's been lived mostly in private law, but also with important stints within public law? And when you have actually been working, as it were, on the public side of things, what kinds of insights has that given you about the importance of law to modern America?
Well, to me, in the course of my legal training, I always thought of the law as the rules of conduct for arranging our affairs, for the freedoms that we have, for the way of life that we lead. The rule of law is very important. It was important in England. We got our law from you. Later on, when we became a much more complicated society, a much more technical society, you began to get some of your law from us, and particularly in the area of regulation, which now we seem to be abandoning.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But the law is a very potent weapon. Litigation could be a vehicle for destruction, like for financial destruction. You have a loser pays rule here in civil litigation. We don't have it because it's thought that if a little guy wants to sue General Motors and he loses, General Motors shouldn't be able to collect all their legal fees, might amount to billions of dollars. So it could be very destructive, whether you win or whether you lose. Even if you lose in the United States, it might, if you win in the United States, it might cost you a great deal of money to bring the action and vindicate your rights. Litigation affects reputation, business reputation, reputation in the community. And litigation can either augment your rights, it can also undermine your rights, depending on the final outcome. But the kind of litigation that Trump was interested in was litigation as a form of warfare. He called it lawfare. He was schooled in the art of lawfare by his mentor, disgraced lawyer named Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn had been the counsel to Senator McCarthy. Roy Cohn had prosecuted the Rosenbergs and had gloated over the death penalty. He said, "I wish I'd been there to pull the switch." Roy Cohn had suborned the testimony of Mrs. Rosenberg's brother in the grand jury and at the trial. He later on, my old boss, Robert Morgenthau, indicted him 3 times, and 3 times he was acquitted. The last trial, this was the second to last trial, through an unbelievable piece of chicanery, which
see the pattern developing
in which he, his lawyer, feigned a heart attack at the close of the case so Cohn, who had not taken the stand, could sum up to the jury and get his personality across to the jury without ever having to be cross-examined on the facts of the case. So he was a very appealing figure to Donald Trump because he was a guy who had beaten the system, beaten the government.
And that's what it's about, beating the system.
And that's beating the system is central to, as an article of faith of Donald Trump. And that's why he's evaded so many presidential norms which have been in place since the founding of the Republic. Well, Roy Cohn met Donald Trump in a bar in 1973 because Trump and his father were being sued for racial discrimination. Right. The government was then under Richard Nixon, but its Civil Rights Division had investigated the Trumps, and they had mounted really an irrefutable case. It was very clever. They sent two FBI agents, a man and a woman who were black, to a Trump apartment building. They asked if there were any apartments available, and the rental agent said, no, no apartments are available. And they said, couldn't we just see an apartment? No, you can't see an apartment, they're all occupied. The next week, a white FBI couple went to see the same rental agent, and they were shown apartments and given rental prices and all the things that were denied the black couple. So they mounted really an irrefutable case. Trump went to every lawyer in New York to find out what he should do. And he was told by the most reputable of lawyers what you should do is settle this case. And without admitting or denying the allegations, you can get a decree and then go on your merry way. Cohn had a different solution: fight. And so Trump liked that. Here was the guy who had beaten the system. He said, you can fight this case even though there's no way you could win it. And so he retained Cohn. First thing Cohn did was he turned around and sued the government for $100 million for bringing the case in the first place.
Wow.
And that drew a lot of attention in the Nixon administration. The case, the counterclaim was thrown out within 10 days by the trial judge.
What a glimpse of the future.
What a glimpse of the future.
I want to ask you about the 70s because, I mean, for the students who are here or for younger people who are here, I mean, I don't consider myself a boomer, but I'm like getting into the boomer zone. Like I can remember a time when things weren't weird. And I feel like if you're under 30, like you can't really remember a time that wasn't weird because it just has been weird, whether it's COVID, whether it's Brexit, whether it's Trump. So you talked about the 70s. I mean, without wishing to be rude about your age, you lived through the 70s as a...
Thank God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, God.
Very important to having you here today. Is this a very different moment from the 1970s? So in the 70s, you mentioned Nixon. We had this disgraced president. We had all of these arguments about executive power. We had disastrous foreign wars. We had stagnation. There were so many things about America that seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Is that a kind of hopeful thing for us now, or do you think we're in a moment that's very different to the 1970s?
Oh, I think we're in a moment that's very different because in the 1970s, the rule of law prevailed. If you were a white-collar criminal, you went to jail. The judges believed that a stiff jail sentence was important in the area of white-collar crime because it was the area where a prison sentence would really be a deterrent to other would-be white-collar criminals, more so than street crime or crimes of violence and the like. Secondly, the rule of law prevailed. Even Nixon believed that the rule of law prevailed because you can see how frightened he became when he realized he might be exposed. And when he was given a pardon by President Ford, he accepted the pardon, which meant that he admitted that he might have criminal exposure. Trump is very different. Trump uses the pardon, of course, to forgive his friends. He also uses the law to punish his enemies, but he
or to
never...
forgive potential witnesses against him.
Or witnesses against him.
Yeah.
Yes, well, she, as soon as she said on tape to the Deputy Attorney General that Donald Trump did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, she was transferred from a high security prison to really a country club where she can go out and do shopping during the week.
Okay, so I'm not getting any hope
But
from
anyway,
you.
we're getting away from the subject.
Well, no, but I'm thinking I'm not getting any hope from you on the 70s comparison. So let me try and offer another thing in a desperate search for hope. Trump 45 versus Trump 47. So again, if I were a relatively young person, I might think Trump was in power for 4 years and lots of crazy things happened and bad things happened, but we got through it. Again, do you see reasons to think that Trump 47 already looks radically different from Trump 45?
Oh, I think it's quite different because he was burned severely during Trump 45 because he appointed people to office who believed in the Constitution, believed in doing a good job, believed in carrying out the mandate of their office, and believed in pushing back against Trump when he wanted them to do things like fire missiles at drug lords in Mexico or shoot Black Lives Matter demonstrators in the knees. And the Secretary of Defense, then he was called the Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War. Secretary of Defense pushed back against that and said, I'm not going to do it. And he was dismissed for disloyalty. But the dismissals for disloyalty sort of came toward the end of the Trump 1 administration. But he learned a lesson from that. And the lesson was, I'm going to appoint people, irrespective of their competence, and irrespective of how they feel about discharging their oath of office, who are loyal to me. Not to the Constitution, not to the country, but loyal to me above anything else.
So loyalty to the president over loyalty to the Constitution or competence?
Yes.
I'm not done with the search for hope. I'm going to come back to it a bit later on.
Please give me some
Yeah,
help.
but I'm going to make my way around it. What's Trump trying to change? So, and that's a big question, but what's his motivation here? Is it material? Is it ideological? Is there a grander political design, or is this essentially about enjoying the office and making a ton of money?
Well, it's very hard to find anything that Trump espouses that's consistent with traditional Republican ideology or conservative ideology, except that Trump wants to benefit big business because big business benefits him. So it was the old Charlie Wilson, what's good for General Motors is good for the USA and vice versa. And so he has some pals, hedge fund guys, other captains of industry who he likes their society. You have to have $1 billion really to be in his society, and maybe even more. But I think one of his principal drivers is to make as much money as he possibly can for himself and his family. Another, he's influenced by some of the people around him, notably Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who has certain views about the Middle East, which Trump has sought to carry out. Some people think that's good, that that's a policy, but I think it's more of a persuasion that's come from his relationship.
So no necessarily larger vision or design. There's something kind of either reactive or more self-centered and self-interested, as from the guy at the top, as it were. Plenty of people he might be trying to appease or bring on board, or they have their own ideology, like a Stephen Miller, say, or a Russell Voigt or whatever. But for Trump himself, it's really more material.
It's more material, and he's by nature a bully. He is the bully in the schoolyard. He can't stand up to the bigger kids, but he's certainly willing to kick around the little kids. So Putin gets a pass. Xi gets a pass. We're not going to have a war with Russia with Donald Trump because Trump will give him virtually anything he wants, or with Xi for that matter. And if Xi wants to take over Taiwan, I really doubt that Trump is going to send in the carriers and the battleships and the missiles. But with the little guys, the petty despot in Venezuela, oh boy, he's willing to shoot down the ships and kill people extrajudicially over international waters and sea lanes without any evidence whatsoever that they were carrying drugs or that any of the drugs were, if they were carrying them, were headed necessarily for the United States. In the past, it had always been the approach that the Coast Guard would interdict the ship, and they'd search the ship, and if they were carrying drugs, they might arrest them or send them somewhere. But never before in our history has a president authorized shooting ships out of the water over international waters.
You probably saw
when we were not at war with.
The British have just said they're not going to share intelligence with
Yes.
the US and the Caribbean because they're worried that that might bring them into violation of international law. And obviously, we're signatories to the ICC. And let me go with this bully thing, because I'm really interested in this idea of Trump punching down, as it were, but not punching up. If you'd asked me 12 months ago, I'd have said punching up would be law firms and universities. And yet he has punched in those directions. And to my mind, extraordinarily, he's found a willingness within the private law world and within the US university world to try to cut a deal. What's going on with that? And do you see the people who have tried to, as it were, appease Trump as having to do this? Or do you see a lack of courage there, or some combination of the
Well, as for the law firms in some of the universities, and most of the law firms in some of the universities, I see a total lack of courage, and a total courage of their retainers. Those law firms want to make money. And I mean, money is, and that's something Trump understands. And he understands that by threatening how they could do business, can't have access to federal buildings, can't have arrangements or retainers with the United States government. That's a very serious blow to their business. And to give him, I don't know, $10 million, $100 million in free legal services, I mean, that's nothing. But how do they look? What does that do for the rule of law? What does that have to do for the right to counsel? And actually,
you've been in that world, right?
Been
so
in
what
that
do you
world.
think is going on with the people who are...
It really tests the ethics and principles of lawyers who say that they adhere to those values, and they certainly honor the right to counsel. But here they're given to a threat, obviously illegal, obviously extortionate. And about 4 law firms said no. They've won their cases up and down the line. Soon it will reach the Supreme Court, and whether or not that's the dustbin of history, your favorite phrase, I can't tell you, but we'll have to see. But the lawyers that have fought the good fight have won up and down the line. And if they win ultimately in the Supreme Court, and I think they will have to, none of those settlements will be carried out by the law firms that settled, because they'll all be illegal agreements.
So how about the universities?
And the universities, the same thing. The universities, too many of them have been overly dependent on grants from the federal government. And they can't abide the prospect that those grants will be cut off. It's total red herring that he broadly alleges that there's anti-Semitism at Columbia or Harvard or wherever, and he says, well, then they're not going to get any federal funds until they eliminate anti-Semitism. Well, we haven't been able to eliminate anti-Semitism with 5,000 years of civilization, and I think there's very little prospect that Harvard or anyone else can eliminate anti-Semitism on campus. But they'll make some sort of, Harvard is fighting it, but some of the universities have made deals with Trump, and I think it's very sad to see.
I mean, that takes us on to the freedom of speech question. I think it was on Trump's first day. It wasn't widely reported because there was so much other mayhem. And we talked about this, right? The kind of flood the zone chaos strategy of Steve Bannon is a big part of understanding Trump's kind of modus operandi. But on that very first day, he issued that executive order saying from now on, free speech, especially in campus spaces, was going to be his lodestar. And it was back, as it were. He'd restored free speech. How do we square that, if at all, with the various attacks on speech that we've seen coming from Trump? And I'm thinking here particularly about folks with green cards, maybe, or visiting students, or how do you make sense of that contradiction between the rhetoric and the reality on free speech?
Well, I mean, free speech means to me, as it has classically meant, freedom for the ideas we hate. We have no outlawing. They do in Canada, they do in Germany, they have in other countries, no prescription against hate speech. If the hate speech incites to violence, then we do something about it.
Yep.
I mean, ever since Oliver Wendell Holmes and no one can shout fire in a theater when there is no fire, and there has to be a clear and present danger, otherwise it's lawful. We dealt with that in the 40s and in the 30s with the communists, and even in the 50s, and we finally concluded that they had rights of political speech under the First Amendment. And Trump is more of the view that if he hates the speech, then it can be prescribed, or something can be done about it. We can take their money away, or we can threaten their existence, use the power of the federal government to do it. If he likes the speech, then he's all for it. And just as he was on January 6th.
Yeah, well, we can't speak about that in Britain now. We'll get sued if we talk about January the 6th. Let me ask you about the national security angle on free speech, because, I mean, again, thinking about someone like Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student who ended up being arrested, taken away from his pregnant wife, shipped down to an ICE facility in Louisiana. If I understand it correctly, the federal government's argument about why his green card needs to be cancelled is that his beliefs about Israel-Palestine constitute a national security threat to the United States. Similarly, what's going on with Venezuela, the whole structure of thinking about ICE and the supposed invasion of the Venezuelan gangs. How did we get to this place where national security seems to be the framework through which Trump is doing so many things that violate accepted legal conventions and norms?
Well, he's been convinced of the validity of the unitary executive theory.
Tell us what that is.
Which the unitary executive theory is that, our Constitution says the president has a lot of power. And it doesn't say anything about checks and balances. Doesn't say anything about judicial review. Doesn't say that the Supreme Court can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional or acts of the president unconstitutional. But that has been the understanding since the founding of the Republic. And John Marshall made that clear in 1803 in Marbury against Madison. And by far and large, the government has respected the legitimacy of the courts and the validity of judicial orders. In the case of Trump, he's challenged those assumptions. He controls the Congress. He has a supermajority on the Supreme Court. When the founders thought the president ought to have a lot of power, they were thinking of George Washington. They weren't thinking of Donald Trump. And there has been, particularly since the Watergate era, but even before, understandings about presidential norms, which no president was prepared to violate. This president is prepared to challenge the validity of a green card because he doesn't like the views of the person who holds it, and is willing to deport people without due process, is willing to authorize ICE to use extraordinary measures, and is, in my view, largely contributed to a lawless society, which has undermined the rule of law. And what is most appalling is that the Supreme Court, at least on an interim basis, on a temporary basis, has been prepared to give him the green light to engage in obviously illegal conduct.
One thinks about government officials and bureaucracy as being cumbersome, but perhaps producing a kind of friction, which is very helpful in a situation where you end up with a leader who otherwise could have like untrammeled, direct power. Is that still a kind of advantage or a phenomenon, or do you feel that a lot of that kind of bureaucracy has been stripped away and replaced with appointees for whom there's no friction? So when Trump wants to exert a force, that force is carried through without any friction whatever.
Well, then you get into a debate to be conducted at the finest universities, such as your own. Is autocracy more efficient? If Xi Jinping wants to build a road, the road gets built. He doesn't have to have environmental impact statements, and he doesn't have to deal with unions. And
it's also the abundance agenda. But yeah.
anyone objects, you know where he's going to wind up. Our thinking has always been,
sure.
and we have a common tradition in this nature, that the government is subject to the law, that the leader is subject to the law. Nixon thought he was subject to the law. The Supreme Court now, at least one justice, Clarence Thomas, in the immunity case, says we've had a lot of discussion about, is the president above the law? The president is the law. Well, if the president is l'état, c'est moi, and that's exactly where we are. So anyway, I'm circling around the unitary executive theory. It's the theory that great deference has to be given to the president, and if he says there's a rebellion, there might not be one ingredient or element of a rebellion that anyone can point to, but there's a rebellion. If he says there's an emergency, there's an emergency. He's the boy who cried wolf, and the unitary executive theory allows him to do that. Sure, we want a president, if there's an emergency, who can take appropriate action. That's why he's there, he or she. One day it may be she. If we have a rebellion, we presumably want someone who can call out the troops and put down the rebellion, as Lincoln did. But to look at the president's citing those concepts to invoke draconian laws and impose them on the people, I mean, that's autocracy run riot.
Can I get back to hope?
Yes.
People that know me here will know I'm an oppressive optimist.
That's a small town in Arkansas.
Quite, yeah. So maybe just a couple of hopeful things, and you can shoot these down. I mean, the first one is, as an American historian, one tends to think of federalism as the enemy of progressive change. And one thinks in particular about states' rights, both before and after the Civil War, as facilitating enormous, sweeping, some of the greatest injustices in American history when it comes to race, discrimination, and so on. Is there a way that we can turn that around right now and see the federal system and states' rights of places like California, say, or of New York, as giving some defense? I'm just thinking about policing. I mean, beyond something like ICE, the number of cops that Trump controls directly is relatively small. So are we seeing a moment in American history where what was previously a design feature of the Constitution that conservatism and racism could appropriate could now actually be a source of resistance to Trump's autocratic tendencies? Well,
that's right. Brandeis saw the states as the laboratories for the incubation of policy. The states are smaller. They have closer feel for the interests of the people, which may vary from state to state. And when there are protests, essentially peaceful protests, maybe with occasional instances of violence with which the local police can readily cope, and Trump wants to send the National Guard, which is, it's very interesting, to cities which are blue cities, as a predicate to possibly deploying the National Guard or the Army to police voting booths and voting precincts to intimidate voters. I mean, this is really, if the states can't save us, who else can?
And you think the National Guard, as it were, is the bigger threat than, say, I don't know, the expansion of ICE? I mean, ICE has increasingly been arresting protesters rather than the people who are supposedly in violation of immigration rules. So is it the National Guard you would fear more than the expansion of ICE, or are they both kind of
Well, I think it's, you know, you lose your freedoms a step at a time, and I don't think that Trump could credibly invoke the Insurrection Act and deploy the Army for local law enforcement. Then we'd have martial law. I don't think he could get away with that, politically or actually, but or on the ground. But what he thought he could do was call out the National Guard by claiming that he has to enforce the federal law and he doesn't have the manpower with federal agents, ICE, the FBI, and the others, to do it. The Supreme Court has raised the question that under the statute, mustn't he first see if he declare that he can't do it and see if he can get support from the regular army, which is prohibited, as you know, unless there's an insurrection from engaging in local law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, okay, that particular kite I'm flying with hope, I don't think you've totally shot that one down, so I'll take that. I want to fly another kite. Ben Weisner of the ACLU, you must have had him on your show, one of the ACLU's lead attorneys. I heard him being interviewed recently, and this is hopeful in some ways, in other ways a bit depressing. Ben Weisner argued that he doesn't worry about confrontation between Trump and the Supreme Court because he believes that conservative forces in the US have invested hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in the last 20 years in getting a conservative supermajority and in bending the federal political system more generally to suit their interests. And that these conservative interests, they're not wedded to Trump. And if anything, if Trump goes in and smashes up this legitimate system that they've built, that's really bad for them. So is there a perverse hope in the idea that actually a somewhat more modest version of oligarchy is already in place? And in that sense, Trump is not the thing we should be fearing. We should be worrying about that underlying oligarchy of the supermajority and Congress being bought off, and that's really the long-term danger, not Trump.
Well, those elements certainly don't help, but I think the oligarchy is in place. I think Trump doesn't have to worry about being Andrew Jackson in 1803, saying John Marshall has made his order, now let him enforce it. They don't have to worry about that. Trump doesn't have to worry about that extreme measure, a disobedience to a court order, particularly an order of the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court is finding in his favor every time. And the way they've chosen to do it is not to write long, reasoned opinions. They've only entertained one case on their plenary docket, which is the tariffs case involving Trump. 28 times in interim orders on the shadow docket, they have issued orders which allow him to continue to engage in obviously illegal conduct in every single one of the cases with maybe minor qualifications. And without any reasoning, without anyone knowing what the vote is, without knowing, giving any guidance to the lower courts as to how they're to deal with such cases in the future.
But just to press you on this point, because again, it's very easy for us to imagine that, as they say very often, Trump has the Supreme Court in his pocket. If we look at the kind of tenor of the tariff questions last week, which seemed quite critical and skeptical about Trump's power, I mean, again, under this 1970s law called IEPA, to be able unilaterally to impose tariffs. He could do it other ways, but that's the way he's doing it right now. They seem quite skeptical in their questioning, and obviously we'll find out what they decide. But even earlier this week with the decision not to hear the case coming out of Kentucky, I think it was, challenging the gay marriage constitutionality, are there signs there that we are wrong to imagine that the Supreme Court will simply roll over in every case that MAGA seems to want the Supreme Court to do something?
Well, I think that the conservatives on the court, Obergefell was a 5-4 decision in the gay marriage case, with the Chief Justice Roberts writing a lengthy opinion in which he found no right of gay marriage in the Constitution. I think they fought the good fight over that. They had drawn tremendous criticism over their overruling Roe v. Wade after 50 years. It's being reaffirmed every time it was presented. And I think to have granted cert, that's how they review cases. They decide what cases they want to review. Having granted cert in this case, had they done so, and then re-examined Obergefell and then decided after thousands and thousands of people, I don't know how many, had concluded gay marriages in reliance on the law, and then to say suddenly you're not married. What about your property rights? What about divorce? I mean, they were opening up Pandora's box. They said, well, look, let's just take that one for the team. And,
so that may be a special case.
Yeah, that's a special case.
I've got so many more questions I want to ask, but I'm also conscious of the fact that many of you here will have questions. I'm going to keep one in my pocket in case we need it. But what I'd like to do now is throw open the floor. We have a microphone or two that are roaming around. So if you have a question, put your paw in the air.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
So on the sort of last point regarding the Supreme Court and Trump effectively having them in his pocket, is it not kind of contradictory to the function of the Supreme Court having lifetime services that justices remain loyal to politicians and their ideals? Surely it's better constitutionally for the Supreme Court to uphold the Constitution instead of playing along to a politician's rhetoric.
You're preaching to the choir, I think. I bet you'll agree.
There was a comedian at the turn of the last century who quipped, the Supreme Court always follows the election returns. The Supreme Court justices are subject to partisan politics. That was the argument I made in my book called Supremely Partisan. This court, well, what's interesting is you take the case of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision. It could not have occurred without the concurrence of 4 justices who were appointed by Republican presidents. So they weren't voting for any political party. They were voting for a right which they thought was in the Constitution. They were doing what they thought was their judicial duty. And then there's a doctrine in law called stare decisis. It means you stand by your decisions. So you had 50 years of standing by Roe v. Wade, and then all of a sudden you have this crew, and they decide, well, there's no right of a woman to choose, no right of autonomy in the Constitution. We don't see it there. And and that might be a matter of ideology, but they certainly paid no obeisance to the doctrine of stare decisis, and instead decided it on the basis, I believe, of their own personal policy preferences.
Thank you. Another question. One over here.
Mm-hmm.
If Trump appoints on loyalty rather than competence, what chance of one of them being sufficiently incompetent to be his undoing?
With this particular group, I don't see much prospect of that. I mean, we have the 25th Amendment where they could, the president could be found to lack capacity to discharge his office. That can only be triggered by the vice president, all the members of the cabinet, and then if he says, I do have capacity, then 2/3 of the Congress has to agree that he doesn't have capacity. So totally unwieldy procedure, and I don't see it as being ousted based on the indications that have come from the members of the cabinet.
More questions? Hi. Thanks.
What, if any, do you see as possible ways out, off-ramps, to where we seem to be heading?
Well, I think it has to come. I think one indication has been the last election, where it seemed to be there was a very strong anti-Trump pushback in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania and indeed in California and in Virginia. And I think if that continues, there's a chance that the Democrats will control the next Congress, and there'll be an election in November of 2026. And if they control the next Congress, you're not going to see much legislation, but you're going to see, Trump can veto legislation, but you're going to see possible impeachment. You're going to see investigations. Subpoenas will be flying like mad, and it might bring enough pressure on Trump to pull back from where we are now.
Okay.
Thank you. The structures of the Department of Justice, both at the federal level and within the various states, that have been systematically dismantled in a very short period of time, because the Heritage Foundation and the like have been planning for this kind of thing for a long, long time. Do you think that the relative mass exodus of competent people will, do you think the institutions will survive to the point where they can be rebuilt, and hopefully, more quickly than they were built in the first place? Hopefully not take a century.
Well,
your thoughts on that?
yes. Well, we're supposed to be I guess I don't need it if I talk this way. We're supposed to be a government of laws, not men and women. But I think that if the political climate changes and people of competence are restored to office, there could be, it won't happen overnight, but there could be a restoration, good English term, of competence in the public service. I'm not only worried about the Justice Department, which I think where I do business is central, but I'm worried about the Department of War, and I think overnight maybe it'll be changed back to the Department of Defense. But when you think of all the competent generals that have been dismissed, the competent admirals, the women, the blacks that have been discharged from the military, expert in their fields, because in one case, because the commander of the Caribbean theater did not want to shoot boats out of the water, and because his loyalty was to the Constitution and not to the regime. And I'm really worried as to where our defense establishment is, and other branches of government, particularly in health, education, and welfare. And the shadow has been drawn over Tylenol, over and vaccinating people. Children have been vaccinated for the last 100 years, and now suddenly it's dangerous if they're vaccinated, and there are people who believe that. There were people who believed it when Trump said you can inject yourself with, you can drink Clorox and you'll be cured of COVID. And these doctrines are very, very dangerous. My daughter happened to live in Chicago during the COVID period, and people came to the emergency room who had ingested Clorox, hoping to avoid COVID. And the anti-science, and we could go into that, the grants for science and for medical research, and the administration of health regimes that have been in place, protocols that have been in place for 50 years. I mean, it's astounding, and it's terrifying.
I'm conscious we may have discriminated inadvertently against a balcony. Is there anyone up there who has a question? We're going to get the microphone over to you. I want to ask you a question about Britain as well. I'll get to that in a minute, but we'll see if we can get the microphone to this gentleman there. Hello.
Hi, thank you. I want to say that when Biden came in, he resisted measures to try and do a constitutional fix to some of the problems that America has seen. He didn't want to pack the Supreme Court. But I wonder, after Trump too, whether there will be, if the Democrats get back in, they'll be much keener to prevent something like this happening before. And what's the lever you would pull, whether it's statehood, whether it's expanded Supreme Court, whether it's looking at other constitutional measures? But what's the realistic lever you would pull to try and avoid a future mess?
Well, I think a good case can be made to expand the Supreme Court to 11. The Supreme Court is 9 because we have 9 federal circuits when 9 was established. We now have 11 plus 2 specialty courts. So I think we could do well with 11 justices, although I think large panels of justices at the Supreme Court level is maybe inefficient. You probably draw more opinions going off in different directions and less legitimacy for their judgments. I think term limits within the Constitution is something I would favor. I think others favor it as well. And there are ways that the Congress could do that, but you'd have to have a majority of 2 houses, and you'd have to have a president who would sign the bill. And it would say that after you've served a certain number of years, you would remain a federal judge, but you would no longer sit on the Supreme Court, and that would be constitutional. And you'd be a federal judge for life at full salary. And that could be done, and you could stack it in a way that every president would have, I don't know, 4 appointments during his 4-year tenure, or maybe 3 appointments. And that would have to be negotiated and worked out. But those are possible solutions.
But you do believe, I mean, just to amplify the question, that at the end of this, it will be incumbent not to assume that if the Constitution survives Trump, that proves how great the Constitution is. Actually, we should see this as a pretext for rethinking some elements of the constitutional order, given the extreme stress that's been placed on it by Trump.
Well, yes, and that really goes to how valuable originalism is as a tool for constitutional interpretation. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, a very different kind of society. Some of the values, the important values of the society we got from you and from Magna Carta. And those values are eternal values, which should exist today, but there were other things in the Constitution that were omitted because no one had contemplated the kind of complicated technological industrial society we have. And so obviously we have to address those problems. I mean, Scalia took the position the Constitution was dead. And his theory was if the Constitution means what we would like it to mean, then we got 9 Nazis on the court. They would like it to mean something other than what it says. So he says, well, we're lawyers, so what we do as justices is we read the text, and then we decide what the society at the time of the Constitution understood its meaning to be. How you define that, I don't know, and why that's useful, I don't know. It says that you can't have cruel and unusual punishments, but in 1789 in Boston, if you kissed your wife in public on Sunday, you were put in the stocks. Now today, one might think that's cruel. One would certainly think it's unusual, but then it was not. And so how do you deal with that? Well, Scalia would say, well, we'd have to adjust that.
I can see my students' ears pricking up. They've just read Jonathan Gannap's new book, Against Constitutional Originalism. And hearing your case for it is interesting. I'm anxious we're running out of time. So what I'm going to suggest is I throw one curveball at you. My question, again, possibly about hope, is about the recent election results in New York City. You're a person who is very familiar with, should we say, some of the elites of that city, because they've been on your show. How are they doing right now?
Well, of course, the day after the election, I took a walk in Manhattan, and there was no chaos. I went to a restaurant for lunch. The restaurant was filled with people. They all seemed very happy. I don't know that Mamdani, no matter what he says, I don't know where he's going to get the money to offer free bus rides to everybody. I don't know where he's going to get the money to have a wealth tax. I don't know where, I don't think he can get a wealth tax. It all has to be done by the state. And I don't know where he can get the money to have a grocery store in every borough where you just walk in and you pick up whatever you want and walk out. So a lot of the half-baked ideas he has really won't have the support because the governor and the legislators will have to run for office next year, next November, 2026, and they will not want to raise taxes or impose taxes on New Yorkers, and so I think he's going to be quite frustrated. But I think people wanted a breath of fresh air, and they wanted something new, and they wanted someone who would stand up to Trump. And I think we're not confident that Andrew Cuomo filled the bill, and he had a lot of negatives. And so here we have Mandami. So I understand you've had a Muslim mayor in London, and I walk the streets in London, and it seems quite peaceful to me, and I'm hopeful that New York will be just as peaceful.
Just to give us an exclusive, you're not moving to Florida?
No, that's the last place I would move. That's the last place I'd move. They have a 2-year statute of limitations on libel. And
Jim, I want to thank you so much for coming to see us and for sharing your insights. It's been fantastic. And thank all of you for being here. Thank you very much.
Well, Thank you very much, and very much honored to be here, and very much honored to be at Cambridge. And Nick, you're just amazing. So it's been so much fun.
Learning from the master. Our QR code is up there if you want to sign up for our mailing list.